Hey everybody, it's Mick Levinskas here from She's Building a Robot, and I'm joined by Michelle Dickinson from New Zealand. Hey Michelle.
Kia ora, how are you, Mick?
Yeah, really good. What part of New Zealand are you in?
I'm currently in Auckland, which is very sunny and very nice today.
Wonderful. That's a beautiful November day. And I can see pyramids in the background. That's not a window, is it? That's actually...
Definitely pyramids from my recent trip to Egypt. And then the bird pictures are from a local artist, and her dad catches birds that are injured and then she paints them and puts uniforms on them. So I've got a whole series of different birds here that her dad has caught and she's painted.
Wow, okay. That puts uniforms on the actual birds.
Yeah, and they're military uniforms based on how she feels that they would look. So
nice. I love it. Very jealous of you being to Egypt. Look, thanks for jumping on and sharing a message. I threw a message out on Twitter and said I wanted to interview a woman in STEM from every country in the world, and I was mortified to see I haven't covered New Zealand yet, one of my favorite countries. So thank you so much for connecting. And what I'd love to start with is like back. Not too far, you're not as old as me. Back, what was the impetus for you getting into STEM and tech? Like, what was it? A teacher, a book, a course, a TV show? Like, what was that first little taste?
It was my dad, as I'm sure many people will say. My first introduction was my dad. So I didn't do any tech in school. It was never encouraged. I was the wrong demographic. I think being a girl, they just assumed I would do girly things traditionally. But my parents didn't have any qualifications when they met. And so my dad decided to go to night school and learn how to do electrical engineering for a diploma. And so that meant my childhood was surrounded by my dad learning at home and having circuits and soldering irons, and just those things were normal around. And I think like every young girl, I loved my dad so much. I just wanted to do whatever he was doing and followed him around. And so he really exposed me to circuits and how to solder and how things worked, and then how to program things to make them work. And we fixed the car and all of those things that I didn't realize were useful skills. They were just things I did with my dad. And then I go to school, and I wasn't very good at school because I'm not very good at reading or writing. I'm quite slow, and found school really challenging, and didn't realize that success can also look like the things I was doing at home. So didn't do well at school, didn't get into university, worked in retail after I left school because that's all I thought I was good at, but always had this skill behind the scenes of being able to fix things that were broken. Growing up with electronics meant that I knew how things worked. And so when things were broken, I was able to fix them. And so while I was working in retail, people found out that I had the skill. People brought in all the things from their home that had broken, toasters, video recorders, and I would sit on my lunch break and sort of get them fixed. And yeah, and then later on in life, somebody said, do you know this is a thing? Do you know you can do this? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, I don't know why you're folding t-shirts in this retail shop, but you could actually do something with the skill of fixing things. And I was like, oh, so luckily got introduced to somebody. And actually, I was in the UK at the time, and they have a special program for wildcards like me. It's called Clearing. And the program is for people who don't have the grades to get into university. There's a bit of a wildcard system where you can apply and you're on probation, but they let you in without the grades that you need. And so managed to get into a polytechnic university. And I didn't know there were different types of universities either, because I didn't know much about that space. My parents don't have any university education. And I didn't know that polytechnics are good for people who have hands-on skills. And so it wasn't going to use all of the essay writing skills that I didn't have. And yeah, and I got there and the university said, oh, you're an engineer. And I was like, no way. Because in my mind, the word engineer was a man. They were greasy. They had some sort of tool in their hand. And I had, heels on and a dress and long hair, and that word I had never associated with me. And they said, oh, but you have an engineering mindset. We've just set you a problem, and it's very obvious to us that you're an engineer. And it took me a long time to get over my stereotype of what the word engineer meant and applying it to myself. And I wish that somebody had said to me when I was 8, you're an engineer, because I could have owned that status. Instead, I just never knew that that was for somebody like me. Anyway, ended up doing really well in that degree, getting a degree in engineering, and then stuck around, did a master's, and ended up doing a PhD in nanotechnology in the US.
Wow, that's amazing. And I both thank you and feel for you in terms of going through that. It is something that we haven't actually talked a lot about, is the self stereotype. we've had sort of family stereotypes of, no, that's my daughter's not going to be doing that sort of stuff. And we've had the social stereotypes of, well, that you're not going to be popular if you're, not, if you're doing that. That's a geeky boy thing to do. But there is the self one as well, right? It's there's the wanting of the awareness that these things are possible, and that fixing stuff is a thing, and engineering can be your life, and then there's the actual self-confidence to push through and go and do it. So glad you did. And I also hope for 8-year-olds now, I exactly have an 8-year-old daughter right now, and I totally hope that for her, that she, the trail you've blazed has actually left a big light for people like her to, and also I think the parents and the network around. So it's not like, so it is like, yeah, it's number one, it doesn't have to be greasy and horrible. Being an engineer can be 100 things, and play to your strengths, and you can be a building mindset while you're still wear heels and a nice dress and do amazing things and be a good person. Like, I'm not saying that greasy engineers are bad people, but so anyway, that's really interesting to think about that, of you're going through your own journey around that sort of stereotype and confidence stuff.
Dads know how powerful they are. I don't think the dad knows the power of himself and his relationship with his daughter, when literally we think you are our superheroes as dads. And so I speak to a lot of people in tech, and they're typically male right now, and they're often dads, and I say, you get to shape the future. Have you ever brought your daughter to work? Have you ever taken your work home and shown and they have done it with their sons, but didn't think their daughter would be interested. And again, we have this self-stereotype of, oh, I want my son to follow my footsteps, not recognizing that perhaps all of your children might want to follow.
Yeah, I think it's, I'm so excited and proud about how far we've come, but I also realize how far we have to go. And it's, number one, I think I'm very lucky and privileged to be in a situation to have exposure to those things, and to have the opportunity to expose my daughters to those things. But I also know that I'm very privileged, and the whole world certainly doesn't have those opportunities. And we probably need another whole generation. And I'd love to hear from you in terms of your whole career. How have you, sometimes it's hard to see the change when you're deep within it, but have you seen some systematic changes?
Not as many as I would like, and they're not moving as quickly as I would like. I would love our STEM space to represent the diversity of the population that lives in it. That's my dream, and I don't think we're anywhere near close to that. I do think we've really targeted some areas, like females in STEM, for example, but I think we have a long way to go to make sure that socioeconomically we're diverse, that by race and ethnicity, and also by experience that we're diverse. And I'm still not seeing those things move. They're not as easy to measure, I think, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. But yes, we are starting to move in the right direction. Throughout my whole STEM career, I've pretty much been the only female on my teams, in my courses. But if I look now at students going to university, we are seeing at least an increase in females studying the STEM subjects at university.
Yeah, that's interesting. There is so many different areas, I think, to work on in terms of the diversity, and I think it can be overwhelming to try to fix them all. And in fact, I think they all need effort and patience. And I agree with you. It certainly feels slow watching it, but probably in the scale of humanity, it might be pretty fast. But yeah, definitely, it's certainly the thought around She's Building a Robot as a book is to think we need 1,000 initiatives over 50 years to have, and hopefully get exponential growth in that. I don't know what the Moore's law equivalent is for social things like this, but I really hope the momentum starts building, and we get more and more, and it tips over at some point, and it might be my kids, right? And they're like, what do you mean 100 years ago the women couldn't be engineers, or that they weren't allowed to do that? So fingers crossed, but I agree, more work to be done. Are there any particular initiatives you've seen around which have been really effective, or are there initiatives you're involved with in New Zealand that you'd love to share?
Yeah, so I had a tech career in my heart. I worked in Silicon Valley, worked for Apple, Intel, Microsoft, did all of that, then set up a nanotechnology lab here in New Zealand, and was an academic at the university, taught engineering, did all of that as a career, and then sort of did what you're doing now, which is looked at the system and said, it's still not diverse enough. We're not moving fast enough. And then I go, somebody should do something. And then I go, oh, I am somebody. Okay. So quit my tech role and all of those jobs, and actually now have set up something called NanoGirl Labs, which is a social enterprise that is designed to get more diversity into STEM around the world. And some of the physical programs we do are built by women for women. And it's really interesting when you have a perspective of diverse people building education programs around STEM. So one of the things that we do is we call it Make Your Own Jewelry course. And it's usually designed for mums and daughters. And lots of mums and daughters sign up, and we don't tell you till you get there that it's actually a 3D printing and CAD course. Because if I said 3D printing and CAD course, nobody would come apart from the nerds. Instead, I want a really diverse group. And so what happens is you come in and you want to make jewelry with your daughter, and we teach you using Tinkercad how to make the different shapes. We show you how to load the 3D printer. You actually print your shape of jewelry, and by the end of it, you're wearing your earrings, but you've used only technology to create that. So we try and create things that increase diversity. I've also written a book called The Kitchen Science Cookbook, and that is a beautiful recipe book designed for people who like recipe books, which typically tend to be mothers and grandmothers who are confident in the kitchen. But every recipe is a science or an engineering experiment, only using things in your kitchen, to really show people that the things that you pick up, your baking soda, your flour, actually are just chemical ingredients, and you are great scientists if you know how your kitchen works or you've ever baked or cooked anything. And so we've tried to build things that really bring a very different audience to STEM and give them practical hands-on experiences that are positive, and show them that if you can bake a cake, you're definitely a scientist. You probably just haven't used that language around yourself.
Sorry, I just actually immediately put a note down because I'm looking for a present for my kids for Christmas, my girls, and that would be amazing. And my son, of course. So I love it. And it's a really interesting thing to think about it. I certainly thought a lot about naming in my book. Originally it was AZ and Ada, but I've tried to really capture the keyword of she's building a robot, she's building robots. So very keyword driven, but I think it's right. You have to think about where the customers are now and take them on a journey, because there is so much stigma. And there's also just this myth that, like, I've been a tech guy all my life, and it just amazes me that people still think, oh, it's so hard to do these basic things. I'm like, you know what? I'm 90% self-taught, and actually it's just fumbling through it a few times, and there's so much information available. So once you get into it, and I can imagine people finishing that course and bragging like, I did CAD and I did 3D printing. Look, these earrings, I made them myself. I designed them with this computer program. And all of a sudden the barriers have changed, right? Their whole perspective on what is possible has changed. And then when you've got the next course on 3D printing, they're like, bring it on. I've already done that. Give me the next course.
Yeah, and so sometimes we find that the language that you and I would use, because we're now tech people, can really intimidate other people. And so what we've tried to do is remove all of that intimidation by creating products that seem normal. And it's not till you get into it that you realize we've snuck all of the STEM into there.
Yeah, totally. I think that's great. And nanotechnology, can you tell what are the things you love about that? And are there things that you that still frustrate you? Or I don't want to paint too much of a glossy picture for any girls who are watching, saying that it's a rosy world of just making jewelry. Like, what are the things that you are challenged by, and maybe you enjoy them, and what are the things that just get you so super excited?
Yeah, so I actually got into nanotechnology because I was a big fan of Star Trek. And there was a female role model in Star Trek. She was the Borg Queen. And I idolized her because she could assimilate other species using these nanoprobes, which are in our optical node. And so I think about my teenage self really loving the science fiction world and wanting to be like the Borg Queen. She was a baddie, but she was cool. And that's where the word nano came up for me. And nano just means very small, 10 to the power of -9 of a meter. So about 100,000 times thinner than the width of your hair is 1 nanometer. And so I became a builder and a breaker of things that were smaller than you could see, right at a time when we were starting to use those in smart devices. So, I went to Apple and we were looking at nanotechnology and smart devices and in your touch screens. And, I was really at that point where nanotech was starting to be used to really make all of our smart devices, our tablets, our computers, smaller and smarter. And so I realized this was an industry that was really fast moving and really interesting. And it was fascinating to be working in California when the newest phone was coming out and the requirements we had to do every time were so much, so much more for so much smaller platform. And I love that. And I also got to do a lot of stuff in the medical industry. So I get really excited about nanotechnology and drug delivery. If we look at COVID, for example, one of the new COVID vaccines uses nanoparticles as a drug delivery mechanism. And so what you're able to do is take these tiny particles and attach a drug onto the outside of them and then get them to go exactly where they need to go in your body, which is pretty cool. Just gonna wait for this fire truck to go past.
Yes. I hope that's not one of your experiments bubbling over now that they're coming for. I wouldn't be surprised if the fire department has you on speed dial, if you know what I mean. But
it's often, today is not my day. So yeah, but I have had the fire service called out a lot. So yeah, nanotech and medicine I think is really exciting. And I know a lot of females want to get into STEM because they want to make a difference. They want to do something in the world. And I look at nanotechnology and renewable energy, for example, if you look at solar panels and how inefficient they still are, there's a whole bunch of research and development that needs to happen into making more sustainable and efficient renewable materials to fight against climate change. And the medical field and nanotech are so vast and so incredible.
Yeah, amazing. And going back to the make your own jewelry course, nanotechnology sometimes may, the theory of selling it one way, but it does something else. Nanotechnology can sometimes be like, what, these tiny little things, there's something scary but for some people about that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that and the it's not I guess and the ethical thing about sort of modifying and impacting the body? The outcomes can be amazing, but is that a delicate balance to dance sometimes?
Look, science can always be used for good and always for evil. You get to make a choice every single day about what you want to do with your life. I think there's risk in any sort of technology. People are now talking about, AI controlled robots and what are we going to allow them to do or not? And what if they get smarter than us and want to take over the world? There's always this fear, but I think there is so much positive to come from these new technologies that we just have to make sure that the people in this space are, kept as communities and feel like they're part of a discussion group around what is ethical and what is not. Hollywood has made nanotech really scary, nanobots going into your eyes and all of these things. And of course, there's always a fear that it could be used for the wrong purposes. But I think the purposes of good far outweigh that. And I think, we have a great scientific community that has great ethics behind it. Nanotechnology on its own is not scary. It's just a size scale. It's just something really small. In the same way that metals aren't scary, but lead, if you swallow it, is really bad. So it's the type of chemical and what you do with it, not the size scale itself.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think that maybe go to a little bit around the overall global, not trend, I guess, maybe challenge to put it, or issue, where science has been kind of questioned about its role and its the importance of science and evidence-based research. It's kind of, it feels like we've went really high with it, and now we've come to a position where some people are maybe a little bit uncomfortable, and this is so much of it having so much impact that it's hard to deal with, right? It's the same reason why fixing your printer is a challenge for non-technical people. Trying to understand nanotechnology and climate change and health and COVID, all these things can be really overwhelming. Is your sense of that's still within all of that the science community is strong and collaborative and is going in a good direction, or do you think there is work to be done in the industry overall?
I think we are highly collaborative. I think the challenge with scientists is we're not very sexy. And so what we're competing against is amazingly created YouTube clips that claim some sort of science, or a Facebook meme, which is beautifully curated. And as scientists, we write really boring, really long papers filled with jargon that are kept behind a firewall at a university. And I think the problem is that scientists just aren't sexy enough. We don't come out and talk about these things in a way that an animated celebrity chef might get you excited about cooking, for example, and then you want to follow that chef, you don't go, oh, I'm going to follow this scientist, because we're quite dull usually. And so I think our challenge is that we don't have great PR. We're not very good at bringing everybody with us. And I also think that we don't teach the scientific process very well. So in school, you learn science, you learn the atomic numbers of periodic tables. In chemistry, what you don't learn is how a scientist actually does an experiment, writes it up, and then spends their whole career trying to prove it wrong. We always try and prove our hypotheses wrong. Every day we try and fail our theories, not try and prove them true. And I think in school, you try and get things right all the time because that's going to help you on your tests. And so I think it's a really poor way of explaining what science actually is. Because then when you might read in the newspaper that chocolate helps you live longer, you go, oh, that must be true. But that's one tiny study, not looking at the overall arching, theory on chocolate and life length. And so I think what we don't do well is explain the scientific process and how one study does not prove anything. It's got to be part of a collaboration.
That's really interesting. I was reading a book about experimentation at scale in the workplace, book called Experimentation Works, and they were talking about the so much of the world at the moment in terms of instant gratification and leaning towards the positive and not confronting the negative goes against that, makes that uncomfortable, right? To say that the whole goal is to disprove your own theory and to have others disprove it. Like it feels like a lot of hard work, and that you're trying to do almost a negative to create a positive. So I think there are those things about it that are hard. I think there is a lot about it which is really sexy, and there's a lot which is interesting. I agree. The PR is easier on a reality TV show, or and I don't know who the new, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye and even the old days we used to have the Curiosity Show and things like that. Like I don't know, it feels like we need another batch of those, and maybe YouTube is good for that. The other thing I think is lost for me is that the tinkering. You get a tablet or an Xbox instead of my day it was an old 286 which I had to pull apart and do the OS updates by myself or work it all out to play any game. Now it's just like, why would you go through all that pain? And there's something. I was trying to explain it to my kids that I built computers and sold them door to door, and they were like, "You built it?" And I was like, "They've only ever had laptops. There's never seen a desktop in their life." So,
and there's also been an extinction of screws. So with you and me, you take a screwdriver, you can take pretty much anything apart and rebuild it. If you look at a device now, you can't. There's no way of getting into your system, and so this generation doesn't get to see what's inside. And my theory is, I want our young people to be creators, not just consumers of technology. But it's really hard to be a creator if you don't know what's inside it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true. Amazing. Love this story. What I'd love to hear, if you've got one, is there any individual story of someone who you've worked with to break a big barrier? So someone who either had potential but didn't, maybe had their own stereotypes, or they just couldn't, for socioeconomic reasons, couldn't access something. Is there a particular story that you'd love to share?
So I have a not-for-profit charity designed just for that. It's all about, if you win your maths competition but can't afford to get to the final, we have money for you to be able to do that. So we have a charity that's only dedicated to access to STEM and making sure you get to all of the things you need to get to. So there are so many students. We just funded a young 10-year-old girl who won the Kiwi robot, the VEX robotics final here in New Zealand, but then the national final was in America. And they needed to raise $25,000 to get her and her parents to this competition. And we just said, here, have some money, go to the final, because it's really important. So there are lots. There was a relatively recent, one of the young women who was at a high school wanted to join her robotics team, and it had always only had boys in there. And the robotics team coach said, I don't really want you to join because I don't think you'd be very good. And also, I don't think that that you'd really fit in here because you'd be quite lonely as a girl. So she called me and said, they won't let me join the robot team. And I said, hold on. So I stormed down.
Hold my coffee. Yeah.
And I spoke to the guy and he said, oh, I'm doing it to protect her. She'll be really lonely. And I said, how about you just give her the opportunity and then he said, well, I don't think, the boys would listen to what she has to say. I said, well, let's just go through this experience, but let's help you set up a robot club that is inclusive, not exclusive. And anyway, she did so well. She ended up winning that year the Vex Robotics Club, and then they went on to win nationals in the US with her leading the team. She has now gone on to study a degree in engineering, and she graduates this year. She's just done her last final exam, and I've known her since she was 13, 14. And so to be able to champion for young women who are trying to, and the system just doesn't think they're ready yet, to be able to see that, and now she has an engineering degree is really rewarding.
I think I mentioned Moore's law, and you kind of think about the exponential flow on second, third, fourth, 10th order impacts of someone trying to protect somebody and not giving the opportunity versus now. And I'm not saying she wouldn't have succeeded. She sounds like she's pretty determined, and she might end up acquiring the robotics company built by those other guys one day. I find there's a certain group of people who you dare them into something by denying them. But it also just really shows that if you do have a small change to unblock that, you can have an incredible impact down the track. And you do get exponential compound interest on everyone you unblock to make successful. So amazing work. Like, that's so good. I really appreciate you driving that forward. Let me follow up and make sure within the show notes we've got links to all your programs. I've already going to buy a copy of the book, so let's make sure that there's one in there as well. Is there any that little message, like if someone's out there going, I'm kind of interested but I don't know where to start, like I know you've got some programs, but is there any advice or suggestions of first steps?
I would say figure out what you love. If you like making fashionable clothing, then try and learn, get a circuit that you can sew and try and make it so that your next item of clothing has a little LED light on that you can maybe control which your temperature or your heart rate. Like, there are so many different avenues. Instead, if you like food and cooking, then think about molecular gastronomy, right? Think about how to make food cool and interesting and sciencey. I think when we talk about science and tech, it's really easy to think of the traditional, I'm going to build a physical robot and it's going to look like a humanoid. But actually, robotics are going to help us all over the world. Robotics can do surgery, robotics can pick fruit. Just think about what you love and what you enjoy. Maybe you love ballet and you want to create a robot, which we do. We teach our robots to dance ballet choreography. And so we have these self-driving Edison robots, and our girls actually create this choreographed dance with their code. So figure out what you love and then find something that you can do within that space and think outside the box, because self-driving robot cars, sure, they can be like a car, but they can also spin and twizzle and do all sorts of other things too.
Amazing. I think that's really powerful. The other thing I've noticed is people kind of think they're picking a career when I'm going to study nanotechnology or be an engineer. And, I think it's certainly changed from 50 years ago when you might do one career for one company your whole life, but you're not locked in now. You can actually do a dozen different things over your life and bring in all the passions and change your passions and have diversity of projects and areas. And that's really good to be like, just follow your passion. And now, again, if you work hard enough, there's enough support mechanisms, reach out to people who've done it. So great advice. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you for the work you've been doing. So glad we got to connect and share this. Again, I'll make sure I follow up and get lots of info to share with all the people watching this. But again, amazing to chat. Thanks for sharing your story. And again, thanks for your support of She's Building a Robot. So
thank you, Mick.
Thanks, Michelle. Talk to you soon.
Bye.